Okay. So enjoyment and relaxation as a sign of progress. And kind of following that idea is strength is defined as the ability to pin down ignorance of sensation. So ignorance, pin down pain. Ignorance of sensation, one of the assumptions is that pain is kind of like, the reason why something is painful, or kind of like fear, you're resisting something. The reason why something is painful is because you're ignoring the sensation that beyond the sensation that you perceive.
Well, I think there's two dimensions to this. On the one hand, there's, I think a strong importance to mindfulness. And so the way that most Buddhists today will advise you to handle pain is with mindfulness. And I think that that is important, and I'll comment on mindfulness for people who aren't familiar with that.
Yes.
But, you're basically, you just recognize it, accept it, right? And so if you look at their brain on an fMRI when they're undergoing pain stimulus, and they've done some experience like this, you'll have a Buddhist who's an experienced meditator, and his brain is lit up where pain is being brought into the brain, but his emotional state is not really disturbed by it.
Yes.
So he's feeling pain but not suffering. Now, it's kind of funny because I want to just throw this out there too. A lot of these experienced meditators who are experienced in mindfulness, they judge everything from the perspective of that's kind of narrow, I think. Tibetan Buddhism has a rich toolbox of different types of mental exercises that were brought up from Hinduism, but a lot of Buddhism, different Mahayana Buddhism that's popular, they're pretty much one-trick ponies. They know mindfulness. That's what they do. So I was listening to this lady giving a TED talk, and she was talking about inexperienced meditators in this set of experiments where they're looking at the brains with fMRI, and they would actually repress the pain itself. On an fMRI, they're having a degree of success of actually turning off the pain itself. So it's not mindfulness, it's something else. Well, she viewed that as that's inexperience. That's awesome, man. If you can do that intentionally, that's not incompatible with mindfulness.
Exactly.
And that's why to me it's important to research everything and to look at everything that we have surviving in the Tibetan traditions as well as in the rest of the Indian continent, and say, look, man, if you can turn off the pain, and let's say I can turn off only 80% of it, now I'll use mindfulness for the other remaining 20%. You know what I mean?
All right. So I kind of go off. I guess I haven't defined it, but I kind of go off the idea that the reason why pain exists is because there's some ignorance involved.
Yeah, I think you mean
sensation.
You're talking about pain in the way that I use the word suffering.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not that I'm not receiving a physical sensation, but
yes, the physical sensation is there. So
but my mind is still at ease.
There's a difference between pain and sensation. So you can feel the sensation.
So the way you're defining pain is like the
hurt.
Yeah, the state of emotional unrest, the state of yeah.
And a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't know that, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
if you can be happy.
For most people, I think in our culture, pain is the sensation.
Yeah, it's just equivalent. In fact, there is a relationship between them. It's kind of interesting. This whole thing I mentioned about the reducing the pain.
And that's something that I discovered in the primary project, the difference between pain and sensation. And I discovered that pain was actually an emotional response. And then I saw a biology video later on, and I was like, huh.
Well, there is, like, for example, in this set of experiments where they had the meditators and practicing mindfulness, and part of the brain was lit up showing they were feeling the pain even though they're emotionally at ease.
Yeah.
However, there's also evidence that being emotionally at ease, in fact, if you could tap into pleasure, stimulating, they do this artificially, stimulating pleasure centers of the brain, and just pain kind of gets pushed off to the side. People become it's really shutting down the pain. So mindfulness accidentally does do a little suppressing of pain itself, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it's purely just being emotionally at ease with the pain. I think you're actually lessening it a little bit because, like I heard this somewhere, I think it was on a TV show, where they were kind of making a play on the words on mind over matter. They said, you don't mind, it don't matter.
Good. Were you going to say something else? Oh, okay. Anyways, so strength is defined as the ability to pin down ignorance of sensation and stay afloat. So kind of like enjoyment, relaxation is a sign of progress. Strength is not bearing the pain. Strength is staying above the pain, or staying above the sensations.
Right. So when you talk about ignorance, what's implied in that, if I'm reading you correctly, is that we've talked about how that by understanding reality and truth, you can keep the physical world from determining your emotional state. Like the Epictetus example with the house.
Yeah.
So I'm not like attached to it in a clinging way, so I don't suffer when it's gone. So if this is the right way to look at the world, then the other way is ignorance. So that's what you mean by ignorance, right? An example. There's other ways.
Yes.
Relating to pain is dependent upon a certain type of ignorance.
Yes. But I'm not sure if it has two different functions there. Attachment. Yeah, there's attachment there. Yeah. And then, so there's ignorance that results in attachment, and ignorance that results in being controlled.
Yeah, so like people have ignorance of themselves. Like you said, most people define pain as like physical sensations that cause sadness.
Okay. Yes.
So that would be an ignorance of yourself. You think that the two are unavoidable package.
Yeah. Okay.
There's ignorance of yourself involved in that. Sometimes there's also ignorance of your worldview when you think that, maybe some wrong assessment of the way you choose to relate to the outside world.
Yeah.
And so, like the attachment example. But I think that maybe there's a degree of attachment involved in clinging, maybe is a better word, in some of these things when we talk about just the fact that if I'm somebody who holds to the position that my happiness is dependent on my circumstances. So I've given all that power to the circumstances.
Yeah.
And my quest for becoming happy is that I care a whole lot about changing my circumstances. Everything. 100% depends on my circumstances at that point.
Yeah.
So that would be, I think there's some attachment, you might say, to the circumstances
of course.
that's different than someone who says, well, I'd like to change circumstances for other reasons, because I believe in, there's good and evil in the world and things like that, and care about the affairs of things, but it's not because my happiness depends upon it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And to kind of proceed in that tangent, eventually along the project, I'll point out that your concept of good and evil, if things are evil, that's also sort of this equilibrium. Because that's still something that you think shouldn't be that way. That's the definition of evil.
We'll have to have some discussion about evil. I have a lot of thoughts on evil.
Okay. And that's one of the other things that I settle on the primary project. So I'll write that down right there.
Yes.
All right. So enjoyment. So I guess these three go together. Enjoyment as a sign of progress. So enjoyment is progress. Strength is being able to not bear pain but stay above it via awareness. And capability is defined by happiness and enjoyment. The more happy that you are, the more capable that you are.
Yes.
Right? And so that's why it's important for you to be able to manipulate your state of mind in order to be happy, in order to be satisfied. Because the more satisfied that you are, the more capable you will be to manipulate with your mind and your state of affairs.
Right.
And I'm not really talking about how happiness is capability, but that's just one of the things.
Yeah.
And happiness.
We definitely know how being unhappy can paralyze you.
Yes. Okay.
Effective,
Yeah.
right?
So I guess it's easier to explain it that way, right? Being unhappy, the only reason why you would be unhappy is because you think you're limited, right? And so...
Or there's some limitation that you're not at peace with.
Yes. And so to get rid of those limits, that would mean happiness.
Or accepting limits, depending on what kind of limit you're talking about.
I don't think I address accepting limits in my Practicality project.
Right.
Everything
but
is open.
You see, for me, okay,
Yeah.
and this is something probably for future discussions, but there's there's different ways to divide up the world of philosophy. You say, cut it in half this way and describe, people who believe, and we were talking about two views on, free choice or not, we can divide it another way and talk about, right? Well, there's a big way of dividing it in Indian philosophy, which it's Advaita and Dvaita. And, this is, the Dva is like dua in Greek. Sanskrit's a cognative Greek, so like when we talk about dual, right? So Advaitins, it's got that alpha privative like in Greek, right? So the non-dual people, this is very popular since Shankar. The viewpoint didn't originate with him, but it became majorly popular. Buddhism helped to propagate a certain very similar viewpoint. This guy Shankar, he ended up in his battle against Buddhism even being influenced some by them, taking some of the things. So Advaitins have this, just to put it in a nutshell, this idea that now Advaitins out there are not going to hate my very simplistic explanation, but this is from the perspective of a Dvaitin, okay? I'm not trying to make you sound good, and I'm making a brief explanation, so we can argue later. All right? Basically, picture that all that exists is God, and people have different reasons for why he chose to do this, but he's got multiple personality disorder, and he thinks he's all of us.
Yes.
And so there's this physical universe too, but that's really sort of like a dream in his mind. It's sort of like he's just entertaining himself, and some of them say that that's his reason. Other people have another idea, but so I need to realize that I'm you and everyone else, and I'm God, and everything is, this is what a lot of people are into, and this is a type of monism, right? Now the Dvaitins, on the other hand, you had like this guy Ramanuja, later's a famous guy, and another guy Madhva that came along, and Madhvacharya especially is influential in my thinking, and then another one of his disciples called Jayatirtha. It's hard to find his stuff in English, but lots of arguments about whether or not multiplicity exists in the universe, whether moksha or liberation from illusion, well, this kind of has to do with what exactly illusion is too, but basically whether my ultimate state is being in a right relationship to God, or whether it's like, realizing that I am God or something, right? They're fond of saying, I want to taste sugar, not be sugar, So I believe that Christianity is a Dvaita perspective, and of course I'm a dualist in that sense. I believe there's a difference between my soul and your soul, between my soul and God, between conscious things and unconscious things.
I think as far as my primary project, it's more Advaitin.
Okay.
It leans more toward Advaitin.
Well, it would be very fun to dig into this and to just bounce stuff off you and hear your perspectives on it.
Anyways, so capability is defined as happiness and enjoyment, and then for like a more casual explanation, a more casual outcome of that is that unhappiness is weakness, and also leaves you open to being manipulated, because if you're unhappy, then others can use that unhappiness to kind of like lure you to do things, so you can be more manipulated if you're unhappy, if you're dissatisfied, if you have a desire, others can manipulate you, by luring you to whatever they want to do.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah. So there's that. The concept of natural attainment, and this is something that I came up with.
Now with the desire thing, and I know we're running out of time, we need to cover stuff, but that's something we should talk about a little more later too, because there's some different ways that maybe I could understand what you mean by that. So
Go ahead.
does desire, in your view, indicate a lack?
Yes.
Okay, because I think
Or a lack or a dependency.
a lack or dependency. Okay, yeah. See, I think that you can have a desire that's not rooted in lack or dependency.
Continue.
We may need to flesh that out in our future discussion because we're starting to run out of time for this session. But but we can make a note. We'll talk about evil.
Okay.
We'll talk about desire.
Okay.
This is good stuff, man. And I had a feeling that talking with you would be just like
tangents everywhere.
It would be like, well, we haven't had enough chance to have these kind of discussions, so we're just going to touch on a whole lot of things we're going to need to talk about in the future.
Desire, not
but I want you to be able to get through your list.
Yeah. Oh, I'm probably. I wasn't expecting to finish it. I wasn't even expecting to go this far, actually.
Okay. Well, that's good news then.
Yeah. Desire not rooted in lack or dependency.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think with this case, it might be the case that it's just a different definition of desire.
It might be.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do a lot of exploring of definitions.
Terms.
Which is always, always the place to start.
Yeah. So possibly just a different term.
Yeah.
Different term to use. Okay. Anyways, natural attainment is kind of like a technique. Oh, I guess it plays into becoming aware of the signs that indicate attainment. Yeah, so natural attainment, and this is kind of like something to practice. For the sake of you being able to perform enjoyment, the enjoyment and the relaxation that I talked about. Natural attainment is kind of like realizing the multiple ways in which your goal is already attained. So it is already natural attained. So everything that you would want in life, everything that you could ever desire, everything that you would ever need is already attained in some way. What are those ways? So you can make a list. So you can mention some stuff that you want in your life, which is what?
Well, let's say people can say
Meeting Bruce Lee, I already have some.
Right. But we could probably break that down to sort of a fundamental ingredients. And say like, well, martial knowledge, well, that is something that I have been learning from Bruce Lee in that way.
Exactly, right. So
you
and not only that, because you've had videos, you've heard his voice, even if it's just through his screen, even if it's just like through memories.
Studied his writings, learned under his first and second generation students.
Yeah, and in those ways, you have already met Bruce Lee, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so other goals that you have.
Yeah. Of course, one of the fundamental things that people I think for conscious beings is when we deal with concepts of good and evil or value at all, we end up dealing with love, and ultimately we're talking in relational terms, relationship. And that also, we have now. In fact, recognizing how much of it we have now and so forth becomes extremely fulfilling because you're not living for some future kind of attainment. As a matter of fact, I think being too focused on some sort of future attainment of it ends up depriving people. This could be taken wrong, but a person can be absorbed in a fantasy world of someday my needs will be met by some kind of relationship. Yeah. We basically call these people codependent, and eventually they'll project this imagination on somebody else, But to be able to enjoy relationship and to, for myself, I see myself in the perspective of this great epic in the war between good and evil, and I look at my present sort of like I saw this documentary one time where they had these Vietnam vets. These Vietnam vets were trapped down in this kind of basement area when their base got raided, and they were down there, and like a lot of them were, I think maybe all of them were to some extent fragged from some grenades that had been tossed down there, but they were able to fight off, keep people out there. Some of them died, but not all of them, and eventually Americans came and freed them. And so I heard this long, grueling story in this documentary. At the end of it, the guy said this really surprising thing. He said, and I can't quote him right now, but he said to this effect, that he wouldn't trade those moments for anything in life. That was so special to him, the time that he spent fighting alongside his comrades, and that time of his life. And I thought, wow, I believe that for eternity I'm going to be looking back at this and that moment, and even this, and all this stuff in the making, and look back on it and enjoying it. So why should I miss out on any of it right now?
Yes.
We always think about heaven as Christians, but we need to think about now in this sense, from the perspective of heaven. What am I going to be talking about for eternity?
That's something that I touched on and that I didn't include in this whole list, actually. Kind of like the way that I called it is the golden years in the present. Yeah, because we think of the golden years like, it's always in the past. But we're making those right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I know some of what I'm saying, if there's Christians out there listening, are probably, I know there's some popular Christian ideas that we won't ever remember Earth or anything like this. And
I actually disagree with that.
Yeah. I mean, there's not to get on a tangent here, but studying the Jewish idiom of when they say remember. I think of a guy, he's running alongside David on his horse saying, don't remember my sins against you when I did this and that. I'm like, oh, you just told him. It's like, that's not what it means. It means don't act in relation to that. So when you have the children of Israel praying to God to remember them, they're saying, act in relation to our situation, like as in to deliver us. Or when they're saying don't remember our sins, they're saying don't act in relation to our sins, like don't punish us. And here's a controversial one. When Jesus says similar things in certain places, but in Luke he says that about the price of sparrows, right? And then he says, and yet our Heavenly Father will not forget one of them. Resurrecting the animals. Resurrecting. Right?
I haven't heard that one. Anyways, okay, so natural attainment. So you understand the concept of natural attainment. Seeing how things are naturally attained. How everything that you could ever want is already naturally attained.
Oh, one more thing here, guys. If I steal a car and drive to Montana and repent, does God know how I got to Montana? Okay. We're going to remember the earth. We're going to remember it. We're going to think of it differently, but we'll remember it.
Yeah. And I have a preaching on my channel that addresses that. Yeah. So, anyway, self-sufficiency is the idea that you don't need anything to be satisfied. You can be satisfied with it. You already kind of like playing off natural attainment as well. But self-sufficiency is like even with the pain that you have. Even if you have a desire, even if you haven't attained something, you're still self-sufficient. You have everything you have to exist, to be satisfied, to be okay. Enjoyment is one of the elements that I address, and so that's why defining good mood is important, because enjoyment is something that is a procedure that is an element that you have to perform, and the more you perform it, the better, right? The more you perform enjoyment, the better. And you have to perform it with everything, and what that translates as eventually is as just being in a good mood. When you're in a good mood, it just means you're enjoying everything.
Yeah.
So good mood is important for that. Solidifying goal, it just means you have a goal. Sometimes it's nebulous, but when you solidify it, you give it a specific space, you give it a specific color, a specific tone, and a specific time. So you're setting yourself a deadline, how you want it done, and the steps to get there. That's solidifying the goal.
Okay.
So that's important in practicality. Infinite barrier, and what that is like basically an impossibility. like when you think that something is impossible, it's like a barrier. But so you know, the possibility of you achieving it, it's a barrier. But when it's impossible, not possible at all, that's an infinite barrier. So,
Okay.
So
Are there some good things to recognize as infinite barriers?
no, the only reason why it's one of the terms is because you want to get rid of the infinite barrier.
Okay.
Things that
So-
you think are impossible.
So like square circles,
Yeah, that's
that it's okay to not achieve those.
no. You can't achieve those.
You can.
Yes.
You shouldn't let,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, see, that's where we have a difference.
Yes.
Violation of the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, go ahead. That too.
That too?
Yes,
Yeah?
that too.
Okay, because I don't know how you're going to do that.
Exactly. Well, I guess a limit, a natural limit for that would be. I still believe in its possibility, but where you would win is solidifying the goal.
Okay.
How do you say?
Because I've got a nice solid,
Yeah.
vision of the. Okay.
If you have a solid vision of a square circle, then you're definitely going to achieve it.
Yeah, and I've got a solid vision that it can't be. So
Yeah.
I've got the solidity there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But because the square circle is it's kind of like a nebulous idea that you haven't really pinpointed.
Well, how about I just say the violation of the law of non-contradiction?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something.
How would you do that? Can you solidify? Can you imagine? Can you cognize a specific way in which you can
Yeah. See, I don't.
achieve that?
I don't. I mean, a lot of people try to argue that against the law of non-contradiction because they want to believe in a totally subjective universe. They want to just say, well, my truth, your truth. There's no objective truth, right? And if I take the laws of thought, I take the law of non-contradiction, which says something cannot. Well, first I take the law of identity, right? The law of identity says everything is identical to itself. The consequence of that is the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be itself and not itself at the same time in the same sense. And then the law of the excluded middle saying that given two contradictory propositions, they cannot both be true.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have people who try to say, well, this is circular reasoning. I think Hume said that, right? Well, he should have just read a little further because Aristotle anticipated that. And he used what he called a negative proof. And he said that if...
Are we good on time?
Yeah, we're still good. As long as I'm out of here by like a little before 10:30, we'll be okay. So if I'm going to say that the law of the excluded middle is false. Okay, remember, the law says that given two contradictory propositions, they can't both be true. So we're talking about you got to have true or false in there. And I'm saying, oh, that's false. By saying it's false, I've upheld it. So if you have to uphold it to contradict it, then you're incoherent.
Yeah.
So that's the negative proof. You have to agree with it to disagree with it. So the laws of thought I uphold. I believe that they're some of the foundational principles.
In my primary project, I go against all of those.
Okay, that'll be
Yeah.
a fun discussion. Yeah. Because, okay, I'll tell you what I am basically. We have these people in the history of philosophy that are called foundationalists. And a lot of times what comes to mind is these people who believe that, well, first of all, okay, they want to take what's totally undeniable fact and reality. So Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. He decided he couldn't deny his own existence. So the idea is you get a foundation and you start building up to your whole system of reality from there. Well, I'm basically a foundationalist by that definition, but a lot of people, what they assume when they hear foundationalist is this idea that, they also consider Descartes, even though he had an interest in truth, as sort of the beginning of the skeptical movement, a lot of people believe. Because it's sort of like, I'm going to disbelieve anything until I can prove it solidly. Well, the problem with that type of skepticism, when you say I'm going to disbelieve everything that I can't prove, is that someone could just reverse the question. You could say, I don't believe in God, so does not prove it. And I could say, okay, do you believe in the non-existence of God? Well, I haven't proven that, so no, I believe that's wrong. Okay, well, I guess you're a theist now. You can just reverse the question, right? So then you have people who think that they're more reasonable is Pyrrhic skepticism. Pyrrhus said, well, we just We just are going to have to remain agnostic about everything we can't prove. Well, that means you're excluding the sliding scale of probability.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really lives their life that way. When you're driving down the road, you swerve to miss something, or whoa, that person's coming into my lane. You know what I mean? Have you 100% proven? Are you staying perfectly agnostic about whether that car is really going to hit you or not? No, you act on probability. So we have to include probabilistic reasoning.
Yeah.
Once we do that, I think the Foundationalist project makes sense. In fact, I think it's obligatory, like I mentioned before, about what it means to live the love of truth.
Mm-hmm.
I usually say, after I say my little spiel about examining every idea in light of its competitors without exclusion, I say beginning with the foundations. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of people out there who they just look to make sure, oh, is this system coherent? Is this system coherent? Well, hypothetically, you could have an entirely coherent system of thought that has a false premise. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we want to go down and see, well, what's the foundation? What's the undeniable foundation eventually, and build from there.
Yeah. I think maybe in another video we'll go over some essential foundations from my primary project. Yeah.
Okay. That'll be fun.
Because I think I started the way I started the secondary project is by just going off my primary project, some essential things on my primary project.
Okay.
So I think I'll bring those up.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so, it's interesting because so far, even though there's some things you mentioned where you think you're in disagreement with me, and we have yet to really discuss a lot about it, you've already spoken about reality in very objective terms, about this is something, that essence of nature, discovering rather than inventing. People who are totally subjectivists just say, well, you just project reality. When you're reading something, meaning originates in the mind of the reader, not in what they're reading. It's all projection. You don't even need the book. Just imagine. Which, you wonder why they're paying so much money for a college class where they're being taught that.
When it's coming from their own head. Right. Fooled you. Yeah. All right, so then there's infinite barrier, right? So infinite barriers are for things that are impossible, and it's breaking down that barrier. I don't think this is part of the definition, but something that plays into it, or the way that I discovered that, is that sometimes you get to the goal, and the severity or the amount of desire that you have for the goal paralyzes you. At the exact moment that you're about to obtain it, because the more severe it is, the more important it is, the more careful you are.
Yeah.
And if it's infinitely important, you're going to be infinitely careful, and you're never going to
be paralyzed.
Yes. Yeah. And so that creates an infinite barrier, right?
It can if you let it.
Yeah.
Of course, you do have to overcome that.
Yeah.
Because you have to look at the other side and say, well, what's the consequence of not acting?
Yeah.